This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Lumbini. The participants are Rakesh Sood, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
The PM is on a day-long visit to Lumbini on the occasion of Budh Purnima, and the Prime Minister is there on the invitation of his Nepalese counterpart. And we also see that both leaders held bilateral talks, and 6 MOUs have also been signed. Ambassador Sood, when you look at the significance of this visit, and we have seen that the Prime Minister has visited Nepal quite often, and the relationship seems to be improving quite rapidly over time. How do you assess this visit when we take a small look back at the India-Nepal relationship?
So far, this has been a positive visit. As you rightly said, the relationship has had lots of ups and downs. We saw a very difficult time when Nepal accused us of a blockade in 2015. We saw another very difficult time when there was the boundary dispute at Lipu Lake, Kalapani in that area. And these are things that have still to be resolved as a matter of fact. But I do think that both sides have realized that as neighbors, we need to put aside differences, not allow differences to dominate the relationship. And we saw that in Prime Minister Deoba's visit that took place recently last month, as a matter of fact. And we are now seeing this again in Prime Minister Modi's visit. So this time, of course, he is not going to Kathmandu. He is using his visit to Lumbini as a demonstration of the old cultural and historical and civilizational ties between India and Nepal, and he is kind of underscoring that. And he had wanted to go there earlier also in 2014. At that time, it didn't prove to be possible. He has, as a matter of fact, visited the other religious sites like Pashupatinath, Janakpur, which is associated with Ramayana, and other temples like Muktinath. And I think Lumbini was one that he had also wanted to do to complete his demonstration of the soft power, the soft ties that draw India and Nepal together.
Ambassador Sood, we also see that Prime Minister today, while addressing the International Buddhist Conference in Lumbini, said that India and Nepal's ever-strengthening friendship and our closeness will benefit the entire humanity in the kind of global conditions that are emerging. And we also see that the PM has gone there and the Buddhist Center will be coming up very soon. How important do you think is this soft power diplomacy, the soft power extension that India has done with Nepal? We've done that with quite a few countries. But between India and Nepal, there seems to be a special aspect. So how can India use this soft power to even further cement its ties with Nepal?
This is always a tricky thing because Nepal is a small country both in terms of population and size. And very often Indian gestures tend to make the Nepalese a little nervous and about their own sense of identity. So, but at the same time, we need to be responsive and generous on economic issues as well with Nepal, because I think we have learned that in the past that it is not enough to rely on soft power. We must also be seen to be generous and understanding. Otherwise, it leads to difficulties. However, in this particular visit, I think it is good that the focus is on Lumbini. In fact, in Lumbini, actually, we have been somewhat remiss, I would say, because a number of countries ranging from America to China, France, Germany, Canada, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Thailand, many of these countries have taken land around the temple in Lumbini and from the Lumbini Development Trust and has built their own monasteries and meditation centers, which are places where their Buddhist monks come regularly. We have a natural advantage in having so many important Buddhist sites in India. And what we should have focused on, but we have not yet built our own Buddhist center, as it were. And this particular foundation stone laying, the Shilanyas, which has been done, was also attended by Prime Minister Deoba, and the ceremonies were conducted by Buddhist monks belonging to different faiths, like the Vajrayana, like the Mahayana, and like the Theravada, 3 major schools of Buddhism. So it basically trying to highlight that India has a strong Buddhist connect. After all, while Buddha was born in Lumbini, it is in Bodh Gaya that he received enlightenment. It is in Sarnath that he had his first sermon, and it is in Kushinath where he achieved his Mahanirvan. So in that sense, there is enormous scope for a Buddhist pilgrimage circuit, which could have a lot of impact. In the recent years, we have also seen that the largest center at Lumbini today is the one that has been built by China. And China hosts a major Buddhist conference at that center, undertakes a lot of activities, and that center is just about 15 kilometers from the border with India. So I think it is high time that we also realize that this is an area which somehow or the other we have perhaps neglected or perhaps taken for granted. And in that sense, it is a good thing that we are focusing on it. But important here is also that among the MOUs that have been signed are MOUs which will strengthen the people-to-people ties. There are different chairs for Buddhist studies being established at Nepal's universities, chairs for Indian studies being established at Nepal universities, and also on technical subjects like engineering, there is an agreement between IIT Madras and Kathmandu University to jointly undertake master's level programs in engineering. So all of this has a very strong people-to-people connect.
Master Sood, just going back to some of the things you touched back, one is, of course, there have been some complaints in the past. We have seen there have been a few analysis from Nepal where people seem to have resented India for a big brother attitude. Do you think that approach with time has gone down and this perception also has gone down in Nepal? And I would also like to go back to the China thing which you just mentioned. How worried or concerned should India, as we see China making a greater outreach and overture towards Nepal, is that a source of concern for us?
Given the fact that India's relations with China are, to put it mildly, strained, I would say yes, because while we used to be the foremost investor in terms of the source of foreign investment into Nepal, it used to be India which had the lead. But for the last 4 or 5 years, it has been China which has taken the lead in becoming the largest investor in Nepal. So the Chinese presence is certainly growing as Chinese economy is growing and Chinese trade is also growing. Nepal has also, there were times, as I mentioned, in 2015 when Nepal felt that India had put a blockade and there was a shortage of essential things like fuel, oil, petrol, diesel, LPG cylinders, medicines, and so on. At which point Nepal reached out to China and tried to exploit, and China, keen to exploit these differences between India and Nepal, did try to step in and exploit this opportunity. So I think we need to be conscious. That is, which brings me to what I mentioned earlier, that we need to be sensitive because between a small country and a large neighbor, there are always sensitive areas. And particularly when the two countries share the same religion, they have a lot of linguistic, religious, historical ties and an open border. We can't look at Nepal, if we just say that it is like India, it is something that at times creates resentment in Nepal. I remember once an Indian actor, Madhuri Dixit, and she said it quite innocently, visiting Nepal, and she said, "Oh, it is just like India." I'm 100% certain that she meant it in a nice fashion. But the way it got interpreted was that it was seen as a sign of India acting like a big brother towards Nepal and, in a sense, denying Nepal its own unique identity. So these kind of issues become very sensitive from time to time.
Master Sood, we also see that visit today, the Prime Minister offered prayers at the Maya Devi temple, and sharing images from the visit, the Prime Minister also tweeted that I feel blessed to have prayed at the Maya Devi temple on Buddh Purnima. The PM was received by his Nepalese counterpart as he arrived in Lumbini. Master Sood, when we see this close interaction between the two leaders, do you feel that this chemistry which develops at the top level politically also goes a long way in developing stronger bilateral ties?
Well, yes, but let's not forget, Prime Minister Modi had an enormously successful visit when he first went to Nepal in 2014, when a few months after he had taken over as Prime Minister. At that time, he addressed their constituent assembly, and I remember the manner in which all the political leaders of Nepal responded so warmly and positively. They felt that it was a very fresh kind of a development. However, within 1 year, India-Nepal relations took very major downturn because Nepal wanted to adopt its constitution. We wanted them to postpone adoption of constitution, etc. And then once they adopted the constitution, there were troubles on the India-Nepal border. That particular point in time, there were very harsh sentiments being expressed by the Nepali political leaders. And it was a downturn. Then gradually there was pickup. It took quite a long time. And then after that, once again, with this boundary dispute, Nepal accused us of trying to unilaterally issue new map in 2019. They then passed a constitutional amendment. Now that issue, they have adopted a new map which has taken about 370 square kilometers of territory that India thinks is shown in India's as Indian territory in our maps. So this is now an issue which needs to be quietly resolved. This created tensions in 2020-21. So this is not something where it doesn't, yes, personal ties between leaders help, but I do think that issues like this, we need to be far-sighted and prevent these issues from emerging and becoming major irritants.
Ambassador Sood, we also see that the PM today remarks that India and Nepal relations are unshakable like the Himalayas. And we see that this has also been a success of India's neighborhood first policy, where we see the strengthening of ties between India and Nepal. As far as India is concerned, what are the three areas on which India should focus so that this strength in the bilateral ties between India and Nepal continues to grow in the coming years?
I think India should be, first of all, sensitive on issues, and India should be generous. I'll give you an example. In 2016, India introduced demonetization. As per Indian law, Nepali citizens were allowed to hold a certain amount of Indian currency. To date, that amount of Indian currency which is still lying there, we have never been able to resolve this. It is not a very large amount, perhaps a few hundred crores. And a lot of that money has been reconverted back. I think addressing the concerns of another 1,000 crores is not such a big thing. It's a small amount, but it's a major irritant. And it has remained like that. So this is just an example. This is what I mean by being sensitive to concerns and also being generous in dealing with small neighbors. So issues like this have to be prevented, and we have to be mindful of the fact that we have a trade relationship with Nepal, and at the same time, we have to be careful that Nepal's identity, its sense of pride in being Nepal, is not something that should get in any way diminished. And so from that point of view, we have to give it that respect of being a sovereign state. That are of relevance would be hydel cooperation, the power generation. Last time when Mr. Doba had come here, at that time, the two leaders had announced the inauguration of a major transmission line. And I think that is something which is extremely positive. In the agreement that has been signed at Lumbini, there is also an agreement relating to the Arun 4 by Satluj Jal Vidyut Vikas Nigam. That I think is a positive thing because Satluj Jal Vidyut Vikas Nigam is already working on Arun 3 project, which is making good progress. So some of these areas are there. The last thing we need to do is to ensure that the projects that we take up, we implement them on time. Because invariably we have found that many of our projects suffer from time delays and which also leads to cost increases. We saw that with the railway line which was inaugurated. That railway line project took more than 10 years. The cost went up. And it is just a railway line that had to be upgraded from the narrow gauge to the broad gauge, and for about 50 kilometers. So we need to be mindful, effective and timely implementation of projects. Because today Nepal can look at China, and the Chinese, as you know, they bring in their own people and then they have a better record in implementing projects in a timely fashion. Now, there are other problems with Chinese projects, but then many of those problems emerge later. But at least we need to be conscious of timely implementation. We need to be conscious and sensitive and generous, and we need to look at the hydel area for further cooperation.
And in the coming days, we will continue our discussions on the India-Nepal relations and also our discussions on the Prime Minister's highly successful visit to Nepal today. With these comments, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Lumbini. The participants were Rakesh Sood, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may email opinion about this program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.